So in the last few years, I've made some cool stuff, I've also made some big stuff, and I've made some functional stuff. It's not loaded, so it just locks back. And assuming you read the thumbnail for this video, you know today we're going to try and do all three. So this is my 1:1 scale Paintball Kraber. It is 4 feet 9 inches long, made of over 50 parts, and in this video we're going to talk about how I designed and printed all of this. So let's get into it. I may have gotten distracted and started another project. I used to play a lot of paintball, but I did have to stop playing for a while because I didn't have the time or the money. Fortunately, a few of my friends invited me to play a few months ago, and it's really gotten me back into the sport. This also made me think about an old custom paintball marker I had made. Now this thing was using some ancient internals, it was on an old 22 stock, and it was fed by 10-round tubes. And I recently found those internals, which meant I had to test it. Seeing that this had potential, I started thinking about what I could do with it. And of course, my first thought was Titanfall and Apex Legends. And my favorite weapon from both of these games is by far the Kraber. The Kraber is a massive 50 cal rifle made for long-range combat. It also just looks awesome. This has led to me getting extremely sidetracked from my other projects. But let's ignore that and start planning. The best way to start is to go ahead and open Apex and grab some reference images. Once in Apex, we're going to have to resist the urge to get into an actual match and go into the firing range. Alrighty, so once you're in firing range, there's basically two ways to do this. You can either have a friend join you and they can hold the weapon so you can reference it to their character, or the other way to do it is to play the best legend in Apex Legends and have his decoy hold the weapon for you. I used Mirage to grab these screenshots. Then we just print out our reference pictures. We're going to go ahead and use this first picture to get a sense of scale of the Kraber. We're going to do this by using Mirage's height compared to the length of the Kraber. Alright, so I'm just going to use a ruler, calipers, pen, and a piece of paper. A calculator will also be really helpful, but I kind of figured everyone has one on their phone. So the first thing we'll want to do is figure out Mirage's height, so that way we know how much to scale everything in the picture. We're going to add a line between his feet, because that'll be about ground level below his head, and then add a line at his head. I grabbed our piece of paper. We know that Mirage in the game is 5'11", and personally I like doing any math like this in millimeters, so I'm going to go ahead and convert that. And this leaves us with 1,803.4 millimeters. Now we're going to go ahead and figure out Mirage's height on the piece of paper. We do want to line this up as best we can with our lines. And on our piece of paper, Mirage is 186.5 millimeters. Next comes everyone's favorite part, math. So we're going to go ahead and divide the height that we know Mirage is, which is 1,803.4 millimeters, divided by our 186.5 millimeters. We'll go ahead and take out our calculator because I'm not doing this by hand. So we type everything in and it gives us 9.669 blah 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 blah. And we're just gonna round this to 9.67. Next we need to find the length of the Kraber on paper. We'll be measuring from the back of the stock to the end of the muzzle. I'm being careful because we do want to get this as accurate as possible. And that tells us that the Kraber's length on paper is 141 millimeters. And now, using what we know so far, we can calculate the total length of the Kraber. So we're going to multiply the length of the Kraber on paper, 141 millimeters, by that X value we got earlier, 9.67. Slap that equation into the calculator, and this comes out to 1,363.47 millimeters. And for those of you measuring in freedom units, that's 53.7 inches. I had gone ahead and converted this into 1.36 meters, but around this time I noticed an issue with my calculation. You see, in video games, it's pretty common for your character to kind of clip into objects because it is all just code. But in real life, now it might just be a little hard to see, but my foot, in fact, did not go straight through the object. So we'll have to undo some of the math. This means when I take the measurement, I need to compensate for the bit of the Kraber that's going into his shoulder. And after that, we get a little under 1,441 millimeters, which is equal to about 57 inches, or 1.44 meters. Now that we know the actual length our Kraber should be, we can go ahead and pull reference files so we have a 3D reference as well. To do this, we're going to use an application called Legion Plus. This will allow us to access specific files in the game. In Legion, we'll have to find the Kraber, and I think it's called the AT rifle if I remember correctly, which we can see right here. If we click on it, it'll go ahead and export the file, and then we can go ahead and open Blender. So when you first bring the file in, you'll see that it has all these different parts on the browser to the right, but it also has barrel stabilizers and different scopes. It actually does this for each weapon, so we're going to have to go ahead and get rid of those. So we'll just click on them and then delete them so we can get them out of the way. Once we've gotten rid of all the clutter and all we have left is the Kraber and the magazine, we can go ahead and export that to a STL file. And I'm just going to label this as reference. And once we've exported our file, we're going to go ahead and open this in Mesh Mixer. I know it's a lot of different applications, but it's just my workflow. And here we have our Kraber. I'm going to go ahead and turn the wireframe on just because I like how much more detail it kind of gives me. Lastly, we need to go ahead and change the scale of it because we want a 1:1 model. So we're going to go ahead and input our length that we found earlier. And now we have a 1:1 scale 3D reference file. And I'm going to go ahead and save this as reference scaled. With good reference images and knowing how big the Kraber will be, we can start looking at how we're going to turn this thing into a paintball sniper. Alright, so we're making a paintball Kraber, so obviously we want this thing to be long range. The only issue with that is no matter what on a paintball field, the velocity is usually maxed out at 300 or 280 feet per second. And everyone on the field is using the same velocity. So you really only have two options. One of them is something like this, the Apex 2 paintball barrel. This basically puts a backspin on the ball by having the ball go down. There's a ramp at the end that pushes the top of the ball, and it causes a backspin. And because of this backspin, it has a flatter trajectory. This is normally used in airsoft in what's called a hop-up. Now, in paintball, that's great. But the horizontal spread from that shot, well, it's not going to be perfect. You're not going to be very accurate because if this thing is tilted either slightly left or slightly right, you end up having the ball go right or left. Our other option, and what we're going to go with, is called first strike rounds. These are basically paintballs, but with a little twist, literally. So you can see on the front half, it's a paintball, but on the back half, it's this plastic with rifling. They get so much more range because they hold velocity, and they're so much more accurate because of the rifling. So this is definitely the better thing to do, and the only way to shoot these is with what's called magazine-fed paintball markers, not your normal hopper-fed. But that's not an issue because our Kraber is going to be magazine-fed. With how we're going to make it long-range decided, we can start planning some other parts. Now, this is a pretty long barrel, so my options were kind of limited, but I knew I didn't want to do a full metal one because it would have been too heavy for me to carry around the field. So I went ahead and decided to use a carbon fiber tube like I found here on Amazon. I figured this would be the perfect option as it's lightweight and still durable. Now, paintball markers use high-pressure air tanks, so I needed to figure out where I was going to put one on the Kraber. Now, I figured the most rounds I'm going to be able to carry on to the field was around 66, which means I don't need a big air tank. Originally, I planned on using a 13 cubic inch 3000 psi tank, but I actually ended up upgrading. I ended up going with a 17 cubic inch 4500 psi tank instead. Before we go any further, I figured I should probably go ahead and plan how this barrel setup is going to work because there are going to be a lot of parts here. I have our barrel in black, our air tank in brown, and then we're going to put the shell around that. We're going to use this inner shell that's seen on the Kraber to hold our air tank and our barrel in place. We are going to leave a couple holes in this part so that we can run a threaded rod through the entire barrel assembly. This blue that I just added is going to be our threaded rods. Next we have our outer shell, and this is going to be more of a detail piece. Functionally, this piece won't do anything, but it'll make it look like the Kraber. On the other side, we're going to have just a mirrored version of the exact same piece. And lastly, there seems to be a little plate that goes on top of it, so we're going to go ahead and add that. Next, we need a way to get our air to our bolt system. To do this, we're going to run a high-pressure air line through our 3D printed parts up to the bolt system. I went ahead and ordered some macro line and some 90-degree fittings for it because that's what's normally used on paintball markers anyways. As for the bipod that's on the Kraber, I figured I should just go ahead and use a store-bought one as this is going to be a pretty heavy marker and I don't know if I really trust a 3D print with that. If you watch my Sentinel video, you may recognize the bipod we're going to use because we're just going to use the same one. I had planned to make the butt of the stock and the cheek rest in TPU, but I later realized I really don't need a cheek rest. This is because my paintball mask will basically fill the space that the cheek rest would have. And for that, all I did is order a cheap roll of TPU off of Amazon. As for the magazine, we're just going to build a custom magazine. I was hoping to get around 22 rounds in each magazine, but it's looking like it'll be closer to 18 or 20. For this, we are going to use internals that are from a paintball magazine. The reason I want to use these mags specifically is because I'm used to them and they're kind of easy to put rounds into. If If you watch as I turn this, the green follower will actually go back, and that's because there's a string attached to this ratchet system. Sorry I had to flip it over, it just makes it easier to wind up. This ratchet system always keeps the spring locked back until you put it into the marker. So we're just going to take these internals and do the same thing in our Kraber magazine. At this point, I was extremely curious to see just how big a Kraber magazine was, so I cut out a piece of paper to the size of one. And man, let me tell you, at this point, the scale of this project started kicking in. Now, I knew this project was going to be big, but it's in a whole league of its own compared to my other projects. I mean, just one of these magazines will take up most of the print bed on my P1P. Now that we have our Kraber kind of planned out, we can start designing and prototyping parts. So the first thing I needed to do is to make sure that this bolt system would work for the Kraber. I went ahead and made a bolt housing that takes 98 threads that I can put this thing into and make sure these internals work properly. Now I'm just going to go ahead and put our internals inside this prototype bolt housing. So we'll drop the front of the bolt in and go ahead and line that up. Once that's lined up, we're going to go ahead and screw this bolt into the bolt. And we want to make sure that the front of our bolt assembly can slide back and forth. Then we just insert the rest of our bolt assembly. It did get stuck at first, but after a good push, it just went on in. And then finally, we just lock everything in with a screw. Using our Allen key, we'll go ahead and screw that down, and now we have everything put together for the bolt system. Once we screw this barrel on, we can finally take it outside and test it. We'll be measuring the velocity of the paintballs using a chronograph. These work by timing how long a projectile takes to cross a set distance. I just got the cheapest one I could on Amazon, and we're going to use that to measure the velocity in feet per second. 218.4. I think I heard something break. 219. 210. 220. 207. The average velocity is way too low. It's only shooting around 220 when we need it up around 280. If I want to use this bolt system, I'm going to have to improve airflow so it can reach higher velocities. To do this, I started by taking our bolt system back apart. There's one piece at the back of the bolt assembly that we need to go ahead and unscrew. So inside the rear of our bolt assembly is a valve that controls whether or not air can pass through. So my idea is that if we can improve airflow through this valve, we might be able to get higher velocities from this bolt system. With this in mind, I went ahead and took apart our valve. I'm going to try and route out where the air is coming in, hopefully giving us better airflow and allowing for higher velocities with the same bolt. This took a while, but I was pretty confident that it would improve our airflow. I worked on it until I was pretty happy with it, and then it was time to take it outside and see if all that work paid off. Pretty good so far. Oh, heck yeah. 147. We just broke 150, or 250. All right, we're getting somewhere. I thought I was gonna have to buy new internals for this, but that's pretty promising. But he in fact did have to buy new internals. Sadly, I wasn't able to increase the velocity any higher, so we had to get some different internals. For this, I ended up picking up the First Strike Scout. This is a bolt-action paintball marker, and most importantly, I can adjust the velocity on it. This thing is designed to shoot first strikes, so I figured I'd take it to the range to show you guys just how effective first strikes are. And we're going to try to hit a target at 50 yards with it. Go ahead and put one in. I forgot to put a forgot to put a magazine in it. I was a little excited. Might help. Alright, that shot a little to the left. I'm going to lower this. So because the barrel wasn't very stable, it's before I put this little locker in here, it was wobbling left to right, which means when I went ahead and sighted it in, it could have been left to right, so that's what we're going to go ahead and fix. So it shot to the left, I need to bring it right. Right above it. That hit the post. Try that. That was a headshot, but we were going for the chest, so we're gonna have to lean a little more. Oh, that hit a little right again. That was good. All right, for those of you who don't know, this grouping right here, even while sighting it in, is insane for paintball. You're not going to get that with any normal round ball, even if you're using high quality paint and perfect matched barrel. At 50 yards, you would have this probably about 3 times the grouping. So being able to hit in such a small area once it was sighted like this is absolutely insane. It was time to open SolidWorks and start designing our Kraber. I worked on it similar to how we planned it, starting at the muzzle and working my way back to the stock. The muzzle was honestly the easiest thing to design because it really only had to go onto the carbon fiber barrel. Other than that, it's just a cosmetic piece, so we don't need to do much with it. After we finished with the muzzle, I was able to start working on the inner shell, which will hold both the barrel and the air tank in place. On here, you can see where the barrel goes through it and where the air tank will sit below it. I did have to slightly stretch the dimensions vertically to allow both the barrel and the air tank to fit. So on an air tank, there's a pressure gauge and a fill nipple, and on the next part of the housing, we need to be able to access these. I looked at the Kraber for a bit and decided to add the access point right here. I figured we're already going to be starting a new part here anyways, and we can go ahead and cut out that indentation and add access for our air systems. And you can see here where we went ahead and cut out the access points. The last part of our air system that we're going to need access to is the on and off valve. This will act as another layer of safety, allowing us to turn the air off when we're not on the field. Luckily for us, the next section of the Kraber actually has a little door on it, which makes it perfect for being able to access our air tank while keeping it game accurate. Went ahead, designed the piece, we have access to our on-off valve, and we have the door on it. You may notice that the door doesn't have as much detail as it does in the game, and that's because of how we're going to paint it, which we'll be talking about in the next Kraber video. The next piece we need to work on is going to be basically the core of the Kraber. This is the main body, and this is where our bolt is going to be sitting in, and our magazine will be feeding into. As you can see, the overall basic shape of what I designed is very simple and blocky. That's because all the extra parts are going to be attached later that will kind of add more detail. On the bottom, I made room for a trigger system. On the back, I made room for the stock and for the bolt to go into. And on the side, I have holes set up so I can attach the mag well. Now, I designed the bolt system to be removable because not only do I need to do maintenance to this because it is a paintball marker, I'd like to be able to remove it so that way I can put a fake one in when going to cons and I can still use this with my cosplays. Then on top, I added a slot for us to add our mounting system. Obviously, we'll need to be able to put a sight on our Kraber. In Apex, the weapons seem to have their own rail system for attachments, but most modern firearms use what's called a Picatinny rail. Picatinny rails use set standard dimensions, which means any attachment that goes onto these rails can basically go anywhere on the rail system. And because of that, we're going to use Picatinny rail dimensions for both our optic and our bipod. After that, I went ahead and made our trigger system. This trigger system consists of 3 different 3D printed parts and a bit of hardware. Real quick, I'm going to draw out how our trigger system works. So here we have our trigger. This will have a screw that it'll rotate around and push this iron rod up through the body of the Kraber. This iron rod will activate the bolt system, and then gravity should bring it back down. But to make it more reliable, I also installed magnets below which will pull the iron rod back down more consistently. This is a very simple trigger system, but it should be all we need. From there, I tried to design our trigger parts so that it can be easily assembled. And once everything's put together, it just slides up into the trigger slot we talked about earlier. With our trigger installed, the next thing we need to do is add a mag well. Obviously, we want this to go onto the side, we want it to look like the actual Kraber, so that's what I did. You can see I also added the mag release, so that when you press the mag release down, it lets the mag out. I went ahead and did a cross-section view so you guys can see how the magazine will lock in. Where these holes are, there will be springs that'll push the mag release and keep tension on it. This tension will push the magazine into the groove over here, and keep the magazine locked in until you press the mag release. Of course, after that, we need to work on the magazine. Now, the magazine on this thing has been the absolute bane of my existence for the last couple months. And that's because no matter how many revisions I've made of this magazine, I always have problems with it jamming. This is the current version of the magazine. I still need to do more work on it, however, this will pass for at least this video. So let's talk a bit about the outside of the magazine. On the side here, we can see where the magazine latch is basically going to go a bit into the magazine to keep it locked in. And with that pressure, it also keeps the magazine into that notch we talked about earlier. Our magazine consists of 4 major parts. We have the magazine grip, the magazine cover, the magazine internals, and the magazine housing. I'm likely still going to have to make a lot of improvements on the magazine in the future, but for right now it works just fine. The last of our major parts is the stock. Now honestly, this part was one of the easier ones to design. It's not very functional other than, holding it to your shoulder. I designed it so that it can all come off as one piece and I can easily access my bolt assembly. Probably overkill, but I also made the stock adjustable. Our stock will have 6 different parts, and that pad on the very back is going to be printed in TPU to make it more comfortable. And finally, after that, all we had to do is go around the Kraber and add some cosmetic parts. I'm extremely proud of this design and I love the way it looks. Here's the exploded view of the Kraber. This thing has over 50 parts, so there's a lot still to do. So as I was designing parts, I went ahead and printed them to make sure the prototype parts would fit correctly. I started by printing the muzzle on my P1P. I printed a lot of the parts for this build on the P1P. This thing is such a reliable machine, but obviously some parts of this project are way too big to be printed on the P1P. And for that I needed to use my larger printer, but that thing's not as reliable as the P1P. Supposed to be the Kraber side piece, so it's supposed to be like that, right? But what happened was let's go over here, turn her off. So turn the motors off. Slowly bring this forward. But look at that. That's insane. Can we get this off the build plate without it all breaking? Yeah, whatever. Wow. That is incredible. So just my luck, in the middle of my biggest project yet, one of the belts had gone bad on the Cobra Max. You can see here where the belt is bad, and then if I move over here, you can see what it's supposed to look like. So lucky me, I get to spend half an hour replacing that belt. After that, I was able to put the printer back and try reprinting that part. This time it turned out way better, and I was able to get both our side piece and our centerpiece printed off. These parts were far from perfect, but because we're going to be sanding most of it, it didn't really matter. Luckily for me, a lot of the parts could be printed on P1P, and this machine is just so fast. I know it sounds like I'm advertising for Bamboo, but I honestly just love this printer. Now in front of me is almost every version of the bolt housing that I have made for this project. Some of these have differences like how the magazine links, threads, but some of them have differences as small as something moved 1 millimeter or less. This thing has been very tight tolerances when it comes to the magazine and these bolt housings. This is the reason this project has taken so long, because nothing wants to work on the first try, and I've had to remake most of the parts on the Kraber multiple times. So why don't we look at just how many different revisions there are. The amount of filament I have gone through. And you can see I ended up using about 18 rolls of filament on this project. This thing was absolutely insane and ate up filament. Let's just hope that all of this will be worth it. In front of me there are over 50 parts that are going to go into the Kraber. With our parts printed, it was time to start assembling. I am going to fast forward through the assembly because if we watched all of it, it would at least be another hour. Between screwing everything in, having to file some stuff down, and using some heat set inserts, this build took a couple days just to assemble. But in the end, it was worth the time. And the last thing I added was the muzzle. Oh yeah, perfect. Alright, so turn this, put our muzzle on, and we have a full-size Kraber that shoots .68 caliber paintballs. That is awesome. Oh god. Jeez, this thing's huge. Alright. That's awesome. Oh my lord. Oh. Magnet's doing their job. Oh my god. Oh lordy. It's actually so long that you can see the muzzle through the scope. Oh, Jesus. Alright, so one thing I wanted to do is my fiance asked me a question that honestly I was really curious about, and that is, how much does this thing weigh? Oh, take it off the table. Jeez. Alright. 10.6 pounds. That's insane, and it's very awkward to hold, but oh my lordy, that's awesome. And that's without paint or filler or anything like that, or without the magazine. So let me grab at least the old magazine. We're going to put that in and see how much that changes the weight. Real quick, I just wanted to show how the mag well works. I have this little dummy mag that's half-sized. It has that little indent on the side, and once you put it into the mag well, the mag locks in, then you press the mag release, and it can come right back out. The magazine into here. And with the magazine, it is at 11.5 pounds. Jeez. So that means a minimum of 5 rolls of filament is what you're going to go through printing this thing, and I'm pretty content with that. Oh my god, this thing looks awesome. There's so much I want to do now. Oh, I forgot to put this back in. Oh, let's turn the air on and take it outside. The magazine was still having issues, so I did have to hand feed first strikes, but it was time to test it, completely built for the first time. It shoots! That's so cool! Oh, I'm so happy with how this turned out. Like I said, I gotta redo the magazine. But this thing's huge, and I can't wait to start painting it. I also tried it with the bipod, aiming at a metal plate at 50 yards. Heard it feed that time. Alrighty guys, that's about it for this video. This thing was so fun to build, it's so fun to shoot, I can't wait to paint it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure to check out the painting video when I'm done with it. I think we're going to go with a post-apocalyptic look. We're going to have a lot of rust, a lot of weathering. Oh, I can't wait. Thank you guys so much for watching, if you've watched this far. Thank you EPAX, who sent me filament. I probably would not have been able to do all this without them supporting, and Rockstar Tactical also sent me a bunch of first strikes because I burned through a bunch while testing this thing. You guys can check out my other build videos. I did do a lot more editing on this one, so the other ones aren't as high quality. I hope this one was high quality. Let me know down in the comments if this one was better than my other videos at least. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and hopefully I'll have a painting video out here in the next, we'll say 4 months.